So we've got a great show for you tonight. Hold on to your seats, and let me introduce our moderator. Our esteemed moderator is Christian Kocher from MetroTechNet. Christian, come on up, and then Christian will introduce the rest of the panel. Come on up, Christian.
Get your motor running, get on the highway, looking for adventure, and whatever comes our way. Yeah, darling, gonna make it happen. Take the world in a loving embrace. Fire all of your guns at once and explode into space. I like smoking lightning. Loving all the thunder. My favorite line. Listen with the wind. Are you guys ready for the best panel you're going to see in Atlanta this year? The best panel you're going to see in an autonomous vehicle. Are you ready to learn what it's like to be born to be alive? It's kind of ironic we're using that song of the week. Peter Fonda put his Twitter feed on autonomous, and it kind of went to the ditch. But it's a whole other joke that some of you older people might get. So I've got a wonderful panel here. I actually know all of these gentlemen, have worked with them in some way before. So I'm going to give a short bio for each of one of them. I'm going to have them come up here and have them tell you why they were on this panel. What's specific about their bio that I didn't cover, because we needed to go through their kindergarten resume. We know that Glenn got all A's in coloring in kindergarten, but why are they here on this panel? What's their reason for being here? So I have to start off with myself. My name is Christian Kocher. I've been in wireless for about 180 years, or at least in wireless years. And I've been in waiting for autonomous for a very long time so I can get the kids in the car at midnight and wake up in Disney World. It's a big dream of mine. And because I think trying to fight texting while driving is a noble effort, but really just having the car drive so I can do whatever I want to do would be the best thing. So I've been in this for about 10 years, starting at IBM, and really autonomous city, smart city, connected car, all these things kind of come together into one shell, and we've got a great group tonight that'll bring that together. So first off, I'm going to bring up John Avery. John manages the Panasonic Innovation Center in Midtown. He's part of Panasonic's U.S. Automotive Group, and they're working on systems that understand and interact with the driver and the passengers in autonomous and near autonomous cars. So I'm going to have you give your little update.
Thank you. So I've been in the automotive space for about 10 years, working for the Innovation Center for Panasonic in Midtown. If you guys don't know what's going on right now in Midtown, in 2012, we were the first corporate innovation center to open there, but now there's over, I guess, a dozen or so right in the Synergy building, just off the corner there at Tech. And there's about 20 some odd corporate centers in the area. It's an amazing thing that's happening there with all the incubation for startups and academia and then corporate innovation working together. I've never seen anything like it.
Has it been 5 years?
We are 5 years this year, yeah.
Wow.
So, and we were the first, and essentially 5 years ago, to see where we are now, and just that time has been pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But our focus there is mostly on in-cabin. So a lot of the focus and talk about autonomy is about the control that's outside the vehicle, but we're mostly looking for how does the car and the driver and the passengers interact with each other. We did some user studies where we had two people in a car together, and we would drive around and see how the dynamics worked, like, for example, a mom and a daughter or whatever. And it was almost a case that there was never a case that both parties were equally comfortable when the other one was driving. So they're either always too aggressive or always too casual. And so when the car is one of those drivers, that becomes an issue to know when the car is not driving in the style that you would normally use. That makes you very uncomfortable.
Gets into my whole discussion of why your car should have a persona. So if I have my wife's driving style and my driving style.
Right, and then so we're working on the systems to figure out how the car can know what your comfort level is so that it can accommodate that.
Fantastic. Tom. Tom and I have known each other since his time at Verizon, but right now, so like I said, a short bio is Tom Taylor works at Autonomous Fusion, the leading autonomous vehicle software company in Atlanta. They have autonomous vehicles, self-driving here in Atlanta. I actually drove by one the other day. Before that, he worked in artificial intelligence. Tom worked in the connected vehicle space of Verizon Telematics. See, he got there. And he's got a great question for us. Tom, why don't you come on up and I kind of already gave you why, but why don't you give us the little bit deeper level of why you're on this panel?
Cool, thanks, and I'm glad to be here. So as you heard, I work for a company, Autonomous Fusion, that is doing autonomous driving here in Atlanta. So probably most of you didn't realize that when you're driving around, you could be driving on the roads with a car that is driving itself. So that's what we do. We do the software on that, and I come from a connected car wireless background, so we also have a pretty good understanding of some of the questions of, is there a lot of data coming out of the car, into the car? How's that going to work on wireless networks when all these things happen? And if you've got kids, I'm happy to talk about whether they're ever going to get a driver's license or not, when an autonomous car is going to get here. So I'm pleased to be here. It's going to be an interesting panel.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tom. So next in the room is our last person in the room on the panel is Glenn Carver, who is an old friend of mine as well, who we met at a tag event in the same building where I think we met, and we go way back. And Glenn is a business development guru. He teaches and inspires business owners, corporations, and associations how to unleash entrepreneurial performance, attitudes, and results within the organization. He's a speaker, an entrepreneur, and the author of the book Stand in the Heat, The Survival Guide for Entrepreneurs, Lessons and Legendary Entrepreneurs Staying Cool Under Pressure. Personal development icon Brian Tracy said about Stand in the Heat, this could be one of the most important books ever written, and I highly recommend you take a look at it. And for those of you that are entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, the thing I like to say to entrepreneurs, people ask me, you've done it before, I say, do you like your spouse? Do you have $1 million in the bank? All right, if you can't check those things off, the next step is get his book, and then we'll figure out if you want to be an entrepreneur from there. So Glenn, come on up and dive in one more here.
Thanks, Christian. Glenn Carver, former VP of Sales of Green for You, in the market looking for my next stellar opportunity. Wink, wink. I'm a car guy since my umbilical cord was cut. I'm an internal combustion engine guy. I love the way they drive. I love the smells, the sounds, everything about internal combustion engines. So this whole conversation around EV and AV, I've got mixed emotions, but I think why I'm on the panel is I understand timing. What's more important, timing or talent?
Timing.
Timing. You cannot dispute the mega trends. The trend is our friend. EV, AV, it's coming. EV's here, AV's coming. So I'm here to learn. I will admit I'm the dumbest guy in the panel, and I'm just honored to be here. Thanks, Christian.
Well, you're the dumbest, but you're not the shortest. And I don't think you're the dumbest, but I'll just say that anyway. We're going to bring on the next guest, who is a bit of automated. David Bigelow. I will read David's bio because you're going to love this. David goes with his usual bio is it's complicated because he wears so many hats, but he advises multiple investment organizations, government agencies, and startups worldwide regarding the deployment of autonomous and connected vehicles and smarter city technologies. And I've got his personal question he wants us to ask later on. But David and I, David, did we overlap at IBM, or did you come in after me? I'm trying to remember. What was the timing?
We overlapped for a short period of time. I can't remember exactly what your dates were, but I think we overlapped a little bit. It was right. There wasn't much overlap.
Got it. So
This is like this Big Bang Theory episode. I don't have a cool T-shirt to put on the device while I'm listening.
Here we go. I saw that episode where Sheldon didn't want to come into work, so we had the robot going around talking to people. So you're basically a virtual Sheldon today. Let's test your AV there.
No.
We need this one live. Can you get this guy?
Audio?
You're going into a headphone. We're just not hearing you yet. It's the, what's the number on that? Try again. Just keep talking, David. We'll eventually hear you. The lip readers in the room? Any lip readers?
This is the first time we've done this live video, so give us 1 minute.
What did you call it? This was stay and pray. What was the spray and pray? This is, I'm just going to hope it's going to work. So David and I were at IBM. IBM, small company you may have heard of. They do something with memory, computers, something. And I started an ITS practice there, and then David came in and took it over and really got into the AV stuff. And so we've known each other for years in the space. David, how you going? You can talk now? Still no voice. I do know people that would say this is a good thing. But none of them are here, thank God. So. His wife too. So we'll put the microphone up here and we'll go from there. Yeah, that one. Use that one.
That's
Perfect.
good. I can talk, I'm ex-military, I can talk pretty loud.
So, David, we're gonna put this mic on you for a second
Right.
and have you tell us your bio of why you're on the panel, what your qualifications are to be here talking about autonomous in the wild.
I'll be selective here. By the way, it's good to be virtually in Atlanta. I always tell the story when I'm in Atlanta. My brother went to Georgia Tech 30 years ago this year, and we had dinner at the Varsity Grill. He'd been a freshman for a week. And he said, "I am never ever leaving Atlanta," and he has. Anybody happens to know Rob Pickerel of Salesforce? He's been in Atlanta for 30 years. It's a great town. I'm sorry I couldn't make it down here. I've got a burning platform with one of my startups right now to deal with here in the Northern Virginia area. Why I'm here? Well, there's lots of ways I could go with that. It's kind of like it's a complicated question, and I don't take a lot of time. Obviously, I've been dealing with connected and autonomous technology back when it only belonged to the military. There were things that the Navy was using 30 years ago, Navy tactical data systems that were that. I then basically ended up in the civilian world 25 years ago in the transit world, and that kind of got me in transportation. And then I've worked for companies like Verizon, IBM, of course, as Chris mentioned, and Booz Allen Hamilton in the technology sector. And in between there, I actually practiced law in the tech sector and got involved with a lot of the liability and regulatory aspects. I've lived in Washington, D.C. most of my life, so I deal with regulation. And why I think I'm here specifically is we're getting to a point now where the connected vehicle technology is effectively possible. It's possible now to have a self-driving car on the road. But transportation, all aspects of transportation are a heavily regulated industry. It's not an app that's in your pocket. It's something that weighs several thousand pounds driving along the highway. And there needs the ability to regulate it consistently so that there's international standards, there's national safety regulations about design of vehicles, but then Georgia and Florida and California and every other state can, as it always has the right to tell any vehicle owner how he or she may operate on their roads. So it's a critical question at all levels of government. It can't be preempted by one from the other, and it's got to be decided fairly quickly because we've had vehicles on the roads and we need to have them out there, and that's in large measure what I do.
Super. Thanks, David. So one last little bit about me and Metrotech. I told you I started at IBM, created an intelligent transportation practice there. I had this idea that safety was really important for this all to be adopted, and that's kind of morphed itself into, some of you came over before and saw a little demo we had up here. I just want to give a brief little conversation about this. Does anybody remember the Google car when it first came out? My job was so much more difficult, and all of ours probably, before the Google car showed up on YouTube and NBC News, right? So you saw that big canonical thing on top of the YouTube, or the Gmail car, the Google car, right? It's going to bring you your mail too, just get used to it. So that now is shrunk down to that. So if you see the little black cone thing there, so that's a LiDAR sensor. And that's by our partner Quanergy. They're one of the big unicorns in the valley. And so we've actually wrote the whole proposal, and the US DOT has paid for us to deploy this in Tampa in the US DOT test bed. Now, it's not just trivial. It's not just, oh, look, here, you can see me moving. Everybody see me moving on the screen there? This person moving up and down the middle there. There I am. So it's not just that, right? It's kind of cool. We can count you with LiDAR. But what we're doing in Tampa is really special. Everybody saw that this lady, God rest her soul, Elena Hertzberg, was killed in Arizona earlier this year by an headless Uber, right? And it's a horrible, and that was the first death caused by a driverless car. And by the way, there's been hundreds of deaths of pedestrians by vehicle since then. You've heard none of them on the news. But we can't take away from the tragedy and what that was. So what we want to do is prevent more of those. We want to prevent more of those from happening. So this type of a device will sit on a busy intersection or a dangerous corridor, a busy area in front of a hotel, or like we're doing in Tampa in front of a courthouse, measure the pedestrian to an exact 1 meter accuracy, well, 10 centimeters, but it's giving you a meter, and telling you where you're at, so the connected car will know that you're there. So it's augmenting the sensors in the vehicle. So we believe this is part of what we call the autonomous safety network. It's getting an augmentation around connected car, smart fleets, autonomous vehicles that enhances the safety, because there's a day out there that Ford calls, I don't know if you heard this term, the post-AV. So there's a day where somebody's going to go to, it's probably going to be Chris Riley, he's going to go to a Ford dealership, buy a self-driving car, and it's going to drive him home. That day, right, is post-AV. The world changes. It's before death and after, before Christ, after death, right? It's that type of an AD moment. After that day, everything's changed. And so Ford looks at what are the investments beyond that, right? The whole industry is looking at those dates. We want to ensure that that date is not 20 years from now, or not 10 years from now. They're now looking at 2020, 2021. We want to make sure that that stays there. And it's solutions like this that augment the safety that we think are going to be important for that. So that's kind of the MetroTech element of it. We've got the demo up here. You can kind of touch and see and feel. So with that, we're going to kick off the panel. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I want to welcome you to the Women in Wireless Forum. Just kidding. Another important group here you guys all want to take care and look at. But this panel here, as I said, are experts in autonomous, smarter city, and the connected vehicle. So the most important thing in a panel like this, always, it's a crazy question, is how do you define autonomous? So I'll start at Glenn, and we'll go down to David from that end. So Glenn, short answer, how do you define autonomous driving?
Yeah, personal experience. Who has had the pleasure of driving a Tesla Model S? Okay, a few hands. How many of you have had the pleasure of driving a Tesla Model S indicator, rush hour traffic, light rain, with your hands off the steering wheel and your feet off the pedals doing about 45 miles an hour? Just me? That's how I define. Now, that's not level 5 autonomous, but that was freaky. That's autonomous to me.
Nice.
For me, I think it's more, rather than when you're en route, it's more about like you can imagine today when you call up the car on Uber to come pick you up and you get in the car and it takes you where you want to go and you get out where you want to be. When I can do all of that, well, there's nobody in the loop. There's sort of, I can engage the system, this car shows up, I get in it, I can somehow indicate where I want to go, it takes me there, I get out. That whole experience is how I think of the thing, more than just when it's on the road doing its thing.
Got it. So when it's in the wild, truly.
Right, when it's the whole system is working as a complete solution.
Okay. Tom?
So yeah, what John just described is what we call SAE level 5, and that's what everybody is looking for. That may be a few years out. But what we will have is we'll have what I call self-driving cars, and we'll have scenarios for that. So a good scenario, if you've ever done this route, is driving I-16 out in southern Georgia. It's one of the most boring interstates in Georgia, and that would be a great place to have the vehicle drive itself. And it's relatively safe, lanes are well marked and things like that. And often people talk about, well, when this stuff comes, is it going to put people out of jobs like truck drivers? And one of the things that is surprising to most folk is that we have a huge shortage of truck drivers. Right. Those of you who have young children and whatnot, they're probably none of them aspiring to come up and be a truck driver, right? Nobody wants to do that anymore. And that's a great place of self-driving technology on those boring roads. Let the truck do the driving or the car, and then when you come into this city, when it's complicated, maybe we'll have the human take over.
Yeah, they can sleep. David, what are your thoughts on what your definition of autonomous vehicle is?
Well, I'm kind of a purist, and I kind of vote for SAE level 5 because I think only a car that can really drive itself should be called either autonomous, and a certain company uses the word autopilot, which I don't think is correct. I do like the idea of self-driving or assisted driving. I think that's actually going to be much more popular, much more quickly for the scenarios already laid out. Most people, including myself, actually really don't want someone to drive the car all the time, much of the time. But when you're on the boring interstate, when you basically want to text and do something and you want to basically have hands-free, I think there's going to be an application for it. My primary thing is that ADAS technology, self-driving technology's primary immediate goal is to cut accidents. The accident figures are about 1.3 million people killed every year, and that's not just drivers, that's passengers, that's pedestrians, that's cyclists. We need some technology that cuts down the human error factor, and we can worry about when they can come pick you up and take you to the dry cleaners later on. I think we've got to prioritize in terms of getting it, in terms of public acceptance as well.
David, I'm going to stay with you and go back the other way. What would you say? I mean, everybody here probably has an idea of the Tesla, the autopilot. What would you rank that? Tom mentioned the SAE 0 to 5, right? Starts at 0. So
yeah,
0.
Yeah.
Where do you think we're at today?
I mean, I think the Tesla autopilot, quote, autopilot is in a high-functioning level 3. I am not an engineer, even though I'm a technologist, and sometimes people think I'm a lawyer, not an engineer, but I've had to debate with numbers of automotive engineers and technologists, and I think it's safely a 3, which doesn't really cut out the ability to need to have human intervention. 4 kind of does, but I think it's 3. And 3, I call that the danger zone, because it's autonomous enough where you're going to pick up your BlackBerry or your mobile device or your book or something and start doing other things and not really be there to intervene. And you can't really do that with level 3, which is why I vote for level 3 for Tesla. Anything else that's on the street now in this production.
That's a good answer. I'll let everybody else kind of concur or add to it. But before I throw off of you a quick answer, is level 5 robot car, David?
Can you clarify about the levels?
So, Tom, do you want to tell us about the levels real quick, 0 through 5?
Sure, I'll do that. I'll start at the top going down. So level 5 is robot car. Think of it, no steering wheel, no brakes, no nothing. Just get in, it drives itself. And
It's Knight Rider.
The air train.
Hold up to remember that.
What's that, David?
It's Knight Rider. I'm
Knight
going to
Rider.
myself. Anybody remembers the old
Yes.
television show from the 80s?
Knight Rider, which you're all too young for, the Batmobile, or the Atlanta Air
Batmobile,
Train.
Knight Rider,
Right.
yeah. Wonder Bug.
So 4 is...
So the best description of 5 is it's impossible for the driver to take over. So think of it that way. So level 4 is that same kind of thing, except it's in a confined world. So it could be only in downtown Atlanta, but not in Alpharetta. It could be only daytime and not nighttime. It could only be good weather, not raining, those kinds of things. And when you're outside of that, what we call operational domain in a level 4, then the driver takes over. It gets, as David said, it gets a little blurry when we get into 3 and 2. So 3 is that the car or the vehicle can drive autonomously in certain situations, but the driver is required to take over when the car gets confused in any manner. And this is where some of the crazy things happen, is because if the vehicle is driving itself autonomously well, what is the driver doing? Not paying attention, right? And when the car gets confused, it needs the driver to pay attention, so that's a little tricky. Level 2 is technically what actually Tesla is today. It has specific scenarios that it can do stuff, and the driver is supposed to always be paying attention. And so they have rules like you got to hold the steering wheel every 10 seconds. If you don't do that, the car will beep at you, do things and whatnot. A lot of people have figured out they don't like that, and so they try to figure out ways of getting around it. But that's really the issue, is that level 2 is safety services, but the driver is always paying attention. And then all the way to the top end, level 5 is the driver is totally checked out because they can't even do anything.
So you think 2 is Tesla, 1 is cruise control?
1 would be traditional cruise control that we have today, or most people don't say it like this way, but I like to think that we've been doing autonomous stuff for a while with anti-lock brakes, right? If you've ever had a scenario with anti-lock brakes, you're doing whatever to the brake pedal and the car's doing whatever it thinks is the safe thing to do. So those would be good examples of the lowest levels.
And 0 is that truck?
0 would be that truck.
Wait, it's probably got cruise control. No, I think 5 is it.
I think there's one more.
Is there? Is it flying?
So you could imagine launching an autonomous car into the world,
Yeah.
and it searches out its own rides, schedules its own maintenance, pays its own taxes, does its own social media advertising. I mean, it's almost like a standalone corporation beyond just the normal functionality.
What if it's
Kind of
undocumented?
joking, but I don't know if there's a level defined for that. But
There
you can
has
imagine
been-
when the AI catches up, that's kind of where things could.
Well, one of the things that I've said for a long time is that, Uber's investing in this technology, so is Lyft. It's very important, but, why not turn your drivers into entrepreneurs? Why not have them be the guys that are, and the gals that are vacuuming and putting in the bubble gum but owning, like, let me get the license for, Alpharetta, Georgia to have 20 Uber cars, and let me lease them and buy them and operate them and take the liability for them. So, convert the whole killing jobs things is important to consider, but also why not think about it from an entrepreneurial standpoint and read Glenn's book and say in chapter 5 why this is the important way to go. So Glenn, your comments on the levels and the robot car.
Well, I agree that the Tesla Model S is level 3. It felt like a level 10 when I was in the driver's seat. That was amazing. I think I agree with Tom. We were talking about this earlier, that there are autonomous vehicles. As a matter of fact, I learned last week or the week before, the most What's the most prolific, notorious autonomous vehicle in Atlanta? What, nobody? What? Marta? Okay, close. Plane. Give that man a 420. So the plane train.
It's actually the oldest, I think it's the oldest
Yeah,
record
the
in the
oldest.
state city.
The oldest.
Yeah.
Is that level 5?
Yeah.
Do you just hop on?
Well, no, it's a controlled environment. So it'd be 4.
Level 4.
Right. If it jumps off and starts going around doing things well, take me to my car, then it would be 5. But
Pay your taxes?
maybe the new mayor. Maybe we'll upgrade to that, pay your taxes. So that's kind of the important question, understand what our definition of autonomous is. But now here's just kind of I'm sorry, it's kind of a stupid question, but it's important. Mayor, maybe foreshadowing, Mayor Kasim Reed on the stage at the AT&T event a couple years ago out in Las Vegas at CES, whatever it's called, the pre-event, talked about the SDV. And here I am in the industry, and I'm like, what the heck is he talking about, SDV? And I don't know if he defined it or I did the math and figured it out, but the SDV is a self-driving vehicle. I thought, I didn't like it at first, then I kind of really liked it. It's kind of, we got SUVs, we got SDVs, we got STDs, but that's a whole other story we don't want to get into, but it's kind of a nice word, but I've never heard it since. So AV's kind of stuck, autonomous is kind of stuck, autopilot, as David said, is probably not the best, but they're marketing up, not so much as what's accurate. Last week I was at Cisco Live in Orlando and I got chastised for using autonomous because autonomous means it has its mind of its own, it's doing what it wants, but it's under your control, so it should be automated. So, sorry, Barry. But there's a lot of these discussions out there about what to actually call it. Is it autonomous? Is it self-driving? Is it SDV? Is it a robot car? So I want you guys to each chime in on what your thoughts of what we should be calling it is. But then also chime in on your thoughts of, kind of what a robot car would be. Because robot cars, we'll get into the dimensions of that afterwards. Because, can it take me to the airport and then go home? Can it take my kids to school? And how old should the youngest, how young can the oldest kid be in the car to make it a robot car and then when it comes back? So there's a lot of these questions I think we have to address the next couple of years. So
Ask Tom first, please.
Can I go first?
Go ahead, yeah, please.
You may recall I work for a company called Autonomous Fusion, so it is by definition autonomous car. Actually, I think it's like, who cares? So most of you have done an Uber. Do you care whether you're getting in a Toyota or a Nissan when you get an Uber? No, you're just getting a car going somewhere. Do you care whether you have a male or female driver? Not really, you're just going somewhere. So it'll be a bit of a transition. So let's take Uber as an example. It could be that you'll get in a Uber vehicle 2 years from now here in Atlanta that has a driver in it, and then 6 months later there'll be one without a driver in it. And to be fair, we won't really care because we're only trying to get to where we're trying to get to, and we're late and we got to get there in a hurry, and we're checked out anyway, and we're doing our mobile phone stuff while we're in the vehicle and that sort of thing. So I think there'll be a transition period, and in some sense we won't really care so much about it. It'll just be a vehicle, no pun intended, to take us from A to B.
So instead of AV, you're saying AB?
I don't really have a problem with autonomous. I think it defines the endpoint. We're not there, but it helps you understand what it is you mean when you say that.
Right.
Automated is where we are, but it's a continuous scale. So it doesn't really nail anything down to me. So personally, I just like autonomous.
I think of automated more like an assembly line, or like you said, in a closed environment, like Glenn?
I vote for autonomous.
Autonomous?
How can I argue? Now, I keep hearing that kids born today will never own a car. That's a whole other subject. Transportation as a service, maybe we'll touch on that.
Oh, yeah.
But autonomous.
David, your thoughts on the naming convention for this said space?
Yeah, I think once it gets to a robot car, it's going to be autonomous. There's going to be, the other thing too is the SAE level is really designed to address the vehicle's functionality. I think when we actually get to these things, because you're going to have value-added services that mobile network operators and other people are going to want to sell, a robot car is going to be beyond an autonomous vehicle, and that there are going to be all kinds of services. You're going to be able to have the ability to work entertainment content, baby or child monitoring if you have an adult picking your kids up so that the parent can monitor it. So I think it'll be defined not just by the autonomy of the vehicle, which will be kind of the baseline, but then the value-added services and content that are going to come on top of it, which will be highly customizable because you can basically bring those even in a shared vehicle. It's like having your own TV show in the elevator kind of thing.
So I like discussions like this because it can influence opinion, and I decided just in this conversation that I hate the word autonomous. And here's why. Because autonomous does actually mean that it has its own mind. It's autonomous. It's independent. And I kind of understand now why my friend at Cisco did say that autonomous is probably not the best word, the correct word, but for now I agree it's the right word. But yeah, if you think about it, autonomous really means it's on its own. And I don't want it to be on its own. I want it to come when I call, right? Get here now. Google, bring me an Uber. Or Google, just bring me a Waymo. So from that standpoint, robot cars and legislation. I think this is an important part. I met with the head of, like the person setting the legislation in Florida for this a couple years ago, and we talked about, so an interesting area. What if you're inebriated, so you're over the legal limit of 0.08, and you're still behind the wheel of your, let's say, level 5 autonomous vehicle? Should you be subject to a driving while intoxicated, a DWI or DUI?
You said level 5.
Yeah.
Level 5.
Not a very good student, is he, right? Level 5's got no steering wheel,
Okay,
so.
level 4. Thank you. Level 4. So here's the test. You're on your autopilot. You're on your level 4. And the reason I asked is that she said you would still be viable. Well, and to her case too, we were talking about autonomous vehicles. She said you still could get a DUI. So yeah, she might have been thinking level 2, level 3. But at what point do we say, well, I bought the BMW with a level 5, so I can't get it, but he's in a Tesla with a 3, so he can. I mean, what are your thoughts on how this is going to legislate out? Anybody?
So again, I think it'll be a transition that we'll see some things. So clearly, level 5, no steering wheel, you can do kind of whatever you want and relatively into the car. Level 4, where there may be a steering wheel, but if it's in the what we call the operational domain that the car can drive itself, then the car is responsible. And so you're beginning to see one of the big issues, that's really a policy issue, is how do we figure out what happens when the car is responsible and things happen. If you're in a Tesla, it's all you, right? I mean, the car can do things and it's really cool things, but you as the driver are fully responsible. And that would be kind of a one way of thinking through those level 3, 4s, and 5s.
Okay.
I was just going to ask, in your case, since you work in this industry, do you have a preference for how that should go, that legislation? I mean, what is, or is that still open question in your own company as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. The policy is really multi-level. So to give you an idea of where we are in the states today, until April of this year, it was illegal to drive a car anywhere in the U.S. that didn't have a steering wheel, right? So that's, when people are started doing this testing, right? So now California, you can do some limited testing and things like that. California has a very different rule than the state of Georgia does. If you, and we're one of the registered companies in California, if you drive autonomously in California, every time there's what we call a disengagement. Disengagement is when the car is driving autonomously and the driver thinks it gets confused and they take over the steering wheel or whatever, it counts as disengagement. You have to record all these things, and you have to report them back as to how many you're doing. We don't have that rule in Georgia. Per one of the comments there, states are going to be different. We got to figure these things out. Yeah. So there's going to be a lot of transition in terms of these policies, how to do it. And you, as the public, will have a big say in that, right? Because we will influence our legislatures, and it could be in conservative South, we do the rules very differently than we do in a more liberal California, or vice versa. We may see some different things there. And I personally think, because now we got government and policy involved, that means it'll take a little while, right? It's not going to be a quick thing. We're going to have to work through the policy, customer, consumer view of things, and that will take us a bit.
David, anything you want to add to that conversation?
I think they kind of covered it, but I mean, like I say, it's going to be incremental, as already mentioned. It's going to vary. I would say everyone, I think one of the big concerns, to hit on something that the others have mentioned, is people have said, well, if it has all these different rules for driving in Georgia versus Florida versus Alabama, how are people going to keep track of that? And I think one of the functionalities that the cars are going to have is, in fact, I know they have, because I've seen them elsewhere in the world, is the car will know where it is. I did an interview for TIA about 6 months ago ago during TRB that I mentioned this point exactly. The vehicle will know whether it's in Georgia or whether, what county it's in, whether it's in Cobb County or something else, and it'll be able to adapt for the local conditions and regulations and not let you do something you're not allowed to do. I think that's an important thing, and will advise you saying you can't operate autonomously within 500 yards of a school or something like that, and you may be able to do that somewhere else. Hong Kong and Shenzhen in China are doing this now, because in mainland China you can drive a car autonomously you can use the Tesla autopilot. In Hong Kong you can't, because the population is too dense. So the vehicle, those people cross back and forth across the border because it's technically all one country. The car won't let you drive in Hong Kong because it knows it's crossed the border until you get back into mainland China and Shenzhen and start driving it again. So the technology is already there to manage the regulatory complexity for the drivers, and we don't have to remember it.
It's fascinating in saying that we've kind of already got, the technology's already there. What's not there is the learning.
The technology's there, the learning and regulation of the human beings just has to catch up to it.
Right. So we have to figure out, can you be inebriated, what level, what state? Can your kid be put in it? Are the doors locked automatically, but then do they release in a fire or a crash? There's a lot of complexities we have to deal with over the next few years. This is the Wireless Technology Forum, so obviously wireless is a key issue. And my personal opinions, this is not, anybody else is here not endorsing anything. My opinion is that a few years ago there was this thing going through the wireless, or the industry, the AV industry, of saying that there would be no wireless radio in the car. And I think it was kind of a misconstruence of a conversation. I think Google was asked at a conference or in a forum somewhere about, will your car be connected by radio? And Google's response was there will be no radio, but it was a little bit inarticulate to say that it won't be dependent upon a radio. Right? I can't just be like self-driving, I lost the 4G connection, and oh crap, I drove into the ditch, right? I mean, what they were trying to say is that it needs to be independent of a radio and a network, which I think we would all agree is probably a safe bet. But the industry kind of went a little bit, I think on the wireless side, the other way, going, oh, they're not going to have any wireless in it. And I don't think that's what they were saying. I think what they were saying was we'll use wireless to augment, we'll use it for information, safety information, vehicle-to-vehicle information, traveler information, parking information. I think they'll be open to it, but I think what they were trying to say is we don't want the cities to kind of guide us in and tell us where we're on a flight path, kind of like air traffic guidance on a runway. They wanted to be independent, but they would certainly take information in. And I think we've kind of settled out a little bit on that. I think that's kind of passed, but there was a time in the industry where I thought, people were like, no, there will be no wireless and automated. What do you guys think the role of wireless will be for AV? And did you kind of sense the same thing I did of this kind of clash between wireless and autonomous?
I guess I'll start. You're right, there's no way you can make it dependent on that, because there are going to be cases where it's not available, and you don't want this car not to know what to do in those cases. But these cars are generating phenomenal amounts of information.
Yeah.
I've heard numbers 4,000 gigabytes a day, or 20, 30 gigabytes per hour or something. You might know.
Yeah, so we do a terabyte an hour in our, what we call ground truth car. So imagine a terabyte an hour going over the wireless network here in Atlanta. You guys may not like that if we do that.
That's
with
per
several
vehicle,
cars.
right?
Per vehicle, yeah, terabyte an hour.
So there you go. And the magical thing about these connected cars is that when you talk about having some kind of an accident, there's a possibility, because the telemetry is all collected, that telemetry could be made available to the systems. Those systems could be retrained, and that accident never happens again. All the accidents we have today, we have over and over and over again. But when these systems produce these results and these things can be collected, then those accidents happen exactly one time, and the whole fleet can benefit from that. So to me, the wireless industry is key to make any of this possible. You can't get 4,000, a terabyte an hour type rates today anywhere close to that. But that's what these things are going to start to require.
You brought something up that's fascinating, though, because it has been, both of those things have been conflicts, right? The first one was, no, we don't need wireless, we're not dependent upon wireless to tell us what to do. But what you just highlighted was,
It's the other half.
but we want you to take all our data, right? And there's that conflict there that has yet to be resolved, the way I see it. What do you guys do with the terabyte of data an hour?
So we actually move it through our own network, right? We don't go over a wireless network because it would be
You're
too...
caching it.
Yeah, so we cache it in the vehicle and then we move it out. But I think one of the places where the word autonomous originally came from was that, the car is designed to be unconnected to the rest of the world. But autonomous vehicles are not disconnected vehicles, in that there's a lot of information they want to send out, and there's information they want to bring in. And one of the easiest ones to understand that is in maps, all right? So we're used to maps today with our navigation systems and whatnot. When we go to level 4 and when we go to level 5, we're going to use what we call high definition maps. High definition maps, instead of being 1 to 10 meter accuracy or 10 centimeter or better accuracy. And so we're going to have those in the car, but do they make changes to the road? Is there stuff going on? Absolutely. Like John referred to it, oh, there's some construction going on here. And so my autonomous vehicle, which is connected over the 5G wireless network, will send up some stuff there, goes to the cloud, and then can go down to other autonomous vehicles, and they can learn and do stuff from that.
But the data will be reduced. So you're saying I'm taking
Absolutely.
a terabyte in an hour, and I'm putting it down to actionable data, and that's what I'm sending back. Probably also onboarding.
That's correct. So it will be a lot of condensing of the data, a lot of compression of the data, and a lot of smarts relative to what you send out, because there's too much to go out over the wireless network, but still, it's a connected car.
But it's connected, obviously, but what's curious about that is, are you taking the data, you're taking a batching and putting it up later, are you taking data vehicle to vehicle?
So, good question. So one of the things we're also going to see in the network is, one of the things that I like to think about it is that my autonomous car is driving down the road, it detects ice on the road, and so then that information goes up, 5G network, up to the cloud, and then you can locally distribute that to other vehicles nearby so they all know that there's ice on the road. So that's one way to do it over 5G. The other way to do it is over the DSRC local network of, hey, anybody nearby, hey, there's stuff going on here. Because one of the things that the localized radios do is that one of the things that's difficult for cars to do is to see around the corner, right? That's a hard thing to do, because you can't do that with optics and radar and stuff. But if there's another car around the corner, then I can use DSRC for cars to talk to each other and maybe tell me there are pedestrians coming or bicyclists or all kind of things like that.
But that brings up a point. The decisions you're making in that car about how that data is transferred up and down about ice and conditions on the road, you're making that up, or is that some standard? And my point is, if the cars are from different vendors coming in from different suppliers, then how are they going to share that data across the fleets? Is that, you think that needs to be some kind of standard, or is that?
Absolutely. So to your point, yeah, we're making it up now because there is no standard. And that's how standards start, right? Is we try to figure that out, how we can do this. And there, as you think about the problem, it's pretty complex, right? So there's going to be a lot of standardization work relative to how we do this whole new level of connected world when we now put not just us people in there, but we put vehicles that may be driving on their own in the mix.
This is such a good topic, and I want to go to audience questions in a minute if you have any. Start getting ready to raise your hand here, but I saw a great presentation at the LA Auto Show last December, something I hadn't thought of. They talked about machine learning, and they showed a picture of a green light and a car going through a green light in a queue, right? And just kind of an average scene you'd see. But there was a police officer standing on the side of the road doing this. You and I, everybody here hopefully would understand what that means. I don't care if it's green, you're stopping here, right? Well, we got to train the self-driving car to understand that. But, so now you do that. Now the teenagers figure out, I can go in front of a damn self-driving car and do this, and I don't have to throw snowballs anymore. I can just stand by the side of the road and just mess with people all day. So now you've got to figure out, is that a police officer or is that a jackass, right? So we've got all kinds of jackass scenarios that have got, that's where, like David said, the technology exists, but the machine learning, the hours has to be collected. That's the big part yet. David, anything to add to that element?
I want to add one element that one of the people hadn't covered. In terms of autonomy, vehicles are obviously, and I agree there's going to need to be connectivity because the value in the data cannot reside on the vehicle and it needs to go to the cloud. One other factor is that vehicles need to be autonomous and operate autonomously essentially when they're driving because of hacking, not just latency and delay as mentioned, but also for hacking. You can't have, like any other mobile device, they will get software and security upgrades over the air. They have to because they are basically a mobile device. But they also can't install those while the vehicle is moving because they need to install them and validate that they're not a hacking or not a Trojan horse or not a virus so that they don't cause havoc and damage while the vehicle is moving. So they need to be able to do that, and if it's an important update, they may have to stop briefly, download, initiate and validate to make sure that they're doing it safety. So there's a hacking component to the need for autonomy as well.
Glenn?
Yeah, this is way above my pay grade, this conversation, but I'd like to share with you a resource and a paradigm shift to this point. So a couple of weeks ago, this brilliant industry report from this think tank called Rethink X hits my inbox. Perfect timing for this conversation. And it's entitled Rethinking Transportation 2020 to 2030, the disruption of transportation and the collapse of the internal combustion vehicle. So I encourage you to get this, read it. It's fascinating. It makes some brilliant predictions, I think are aggressive, Tom. I think we agreed on that. But one of the things they said is that the vehicles are becoming information servers. You know, I think of my 2006 BMW as, you know, it's my vehicle, I drive it. It doesn't listen to me. But these vehicles are becoming autonomous, they're becoming electric, they're becoming information servers, computers on wheels, and that's for me, that's a paradigm shift.
Very good. Anybody have any questions? The question was, what level is commercial airplane?
Have you heard the story about the man and the dog? No? So, in the not too distant future, a Boeing 737 is going to pull away from the terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson. It's going to taxi out to the runway. It's going to taxi down the runway. It's going to take off, and it's going to fly across the country to LAX. It's going to land, and it's going to taxi back up to the terminal at LAX, all of which is going to happen without a pilot in the cockpit. How does that make you feel? It's unnerving for most of us. So the industry realizes that's going to put us at a state of unease. So in the interim, in the cockpit, they're going to put a man and a dog. And you may be thinking to yourself, what's the man's job? Well, the man's job is to feed the dog. So what's the dog's job? The dog's job is to bite that son of a gun if he touches anything. Does that answer your question? I need to pay him for setting that up.
So to answer the question today, an airplane would be a level 4, right? Because it's got a steering wheel, right? But there are places where it drives by itself. And then there are places where the human takes over. Typically, we think of that as landing and moving around on the tarmac and that kind of stuff. But most of the time when they're in the air, just like with cars, the machine can fly the plane more efficiently than a person can from a fuel perspective and that kind of thing.
Just to tie it all together, the plane train does not have a steering wheel. But it's a limited environment. So are we 4.5?
They only can go in limited domain, it'd be a 4, right? They can stay in the rails, right? So trains are level 4s, they stay in rails.
Yes, sir. How dependent is the autonomous vehicle on the city infrastructure? So thoughts? I'll start with David. Do you have any thoughts on how dependent?
I would say not much yet, because most of the infrastructure is intelligent transportation systems, or IDS, things like traffic counters, loop detectors, video cameras, things like that. So most of the city infrastructure is not that smart. Part of the thinking that everyone's kind of beginning to go down the road is, if you have a connected vehicle, a lot of this other infrastructure, like I just mentioned, is about to be replaced because it's 30 years old or plus. Instead of having all of these cameras and roads, we call it RSE, roadside equipment, why do we need all this roadside gear, which is very expensive for the taxpayers, when the vehicles are going to be connecting the same data anyway? So my theory I'll postulate here to that question is, the connected vehicles are going to become some of the infrastructure for the city in terms of collecting data, and some of the infrastructure the city has now may not need to be connected because it'll become obsolete and it can just be phased out when it gets old. Pretty much all of it is already anyway.
All right, yes, no question, David. Are we going to get rid of signals after AV is fully deployed?
I don't think that quickly. At age 52, I'd be surprised if I lived to see it. But I mean, all of this stuff, all of this flying stuff, everything will probably come to pass. If anybody's in their 20s and 30s, they might see it, but I think it's going to come at some point. I think because of all the legacy vehicles on the road, it's going to be some decades, because they're still making conventional vehicles all over the place now. Most of them are. So I think yes, but that's not something I would want to bet my next week's paycheck on coming to pass in the next 5 years, for example.
John has worked on Denver Smarter City project, so some thoughts on that?
We're actually deploying a DSRC and a CV2X overlay out in Denver between I-90 on the west side of Denver out to the ski resorts. There is a lot of infrastructure that goes in there. But actually, to answer the question specifically, I actually think there'll be a continuum in the world at the same time as far as how much dependence the cars have on the infrastructure, because the smarter the infrastructure is, the dumber the car can be, which is another word for cheaper. And so economic factors, I think, will control whether or not a corridor is intelligent and the cars can be cheaper, or the corridor is not instrumented and therefore the cars have to be more expensive. And so you can imagine a case where certain kinds of cheaper cars are available in this corridor because it's smart, and other more expensive cars with more sensors like the Quanergy kind of LiDARs are needed because it's not smart. Both of those make sense in different economic models, so I think they'll all exist at the same time.
I want to tie one thing together, Tom, before I let you give your thoughts on that. You talked about seeing around the corner being important. What we saw in the death in Arizona, I don't know if you saw the report came out this week, the Volvo normal system that you would have in your Volvo you bought saw her and would have engaged the brakes, but they've been disengaged for the AV testing, which is probably germane, but the issue is that the AV testing couldn't decide on what the object was. The person with a bicycle, they went from a car to an object to a pedestrian, and it was the indecision because of the lack of the data set. I thought was fascinating. One of the things that Metrotech is toying with for a new tagline is Metrotech allows you to see around the corner, over the hill and far away, wrong way driver being the far away, over the hill being a traffic jam, and around the corner being the pedestrian. And on this intersection we deployed between the courthouse and the parking deck down in Tampa, I literally went to drive it one day, just kind of film through it and look at it, and I'll be danged if it doesn't just sneak right up on you. So yes, I might have my eyeballs and I might have sensors in my vehicle, but sometimes somebody steps out from behind a bus or a car. And to know that that person's there, those are the interesting things that I think the infrastructure can augment. So again, not to be dependent upon, my car can still operate, but if my connected car autonomous vehicle can have additional safety messages, what's coming out of that alley, seeing around corners, seeing over hills and seeing far away, I do think that that's going to happen here in the next 5 years. That's what we're working to deploy.
Yeah, one of the good things about this being a transition, there'll be some things that help us as human drivers. So all autonomous cars use camera or LiDAR systems to see, and they like to see the lanes in the road. So imagine your commute on 75, 85, wherever, where the lane markers are all worn down and all that kind of stuff. They're going to all get painted. So it'll be better for us as human drivers. We're able to see because it's also better for the autonomous cars to drive. And then relative to the timing thing, one of the biggest problems is the average life of a car. Average life of a car in the U.S. is over 10 years old. Right. So that means on average, we don't turn out our cars that often, right? And so while we're making new cars with a lot of new safety features on them, there are many, 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 over 200 million cars on the road that don't have any of those kind of things in them. So that's unfortunately one of the things that keeps the traffic lights and all that other old legacy stuff there, because we're going to have the little clunker, and we keep that clunker either for our kids going to take it or whatever reason we keep them. Is that once we pay for it and whatnot, sometimes we keep them.
So you're saying under the next Obama administration, instead of cash for clunkers, it's going to be cash for level 3.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. I think shared cars will begin to accelerate that because the shared car fleets will renew much quicker. They'll get driven much more. So they'll amortize quickly, and people will basically, write them down on their books, and they're not going to keep them. You don't see old rental cars now because they basically drive them all over the place, and they wear out. So it'll be, it may be different, and probably it's going to be different in rural areas. People are going to buy a truck, and they're going to use the truck for 15 years versus in urban areas where people just have a share car. So the new ownership models will drive some of that, but that's why, to my point, it's going to be a while because people keep their cars. I still have a 2004 Altima that only has 140,000 miles on it. I got to get at least 200,000 miles out of a car. I haven't got my money's worth.
So we struggle in what I've been working on the last 10 years to find a name for our industry between smarter cities and connected cars. And the closest we came was Mercedes actually calls it CASE, Connected Autonomous Sharing Electric, right? But we don't do specific electric. Glenn, I know you've got a lot of experience on electric. Do they last longer? Give us a little bit of a sense of what electric's going to do to the industry as far as AV.
Well, electric's here. There's a tsunami of electric vehicles coming to the fleet market. It's coming to the fleet market faster than the consumer market. We think more about the consumer market because of the sexiness of Tesla. But I believe that all electric EV new car sales are less than 1% in this country. It seems like it's higher with the Tesla and the Chevy Bolt and the Nissan Leaf that was so popular in Georgia when we had the tax credit. But I believe nationwide, new EV sales are less than 1%. The fleet market's a different conversation. The fleet market is all about total cost of operation over an extended period of time, typically 5 to 7 years. And they're not concerned about a sexy fender line. They're concerned about a bottom line number. It's a math equation. And quick story, this will put the EV conversation into perspective and why it's coming, especially to the fleet markets. About this time last year in June, I was at a big EV conference in Portland called EV Roadmap. And I had the experience of riding on an all-electric 40-foot bus for the first time. So imagine a 40-foot MARTA bus, all-electric. This was a BYD, a Chinese OEM, and I was on my first all-electric bus. Pretty cool. And the guy giving the tour was the Northwest Regional Manager for BYD, and he said on a typical diesel bus, think of MARTA, this size, 40 feet, it's got 3,500 moving parts when you consider the whole drivetrain, from the engine to the transmission to the axles. He said on this bus that we're riding right now has 150 moving parts. Wow. Wow. So I picked my chin up off the floor, did some quick Georgia math. That's 3,350 fewer moving parts that you have to maintain that will wear out. So there's a tectonic shift coming to the internal combustion engine supply chain. It's more, that's why we're seeing the movement to the fleets faster than the consumer market, but it's coming. This is no fad.
I had a question back there and one up here. So how long until the family can work in a sharing account? Have an affordable sharing economy. So transportation as a service.
You definitely want to read this Rethink report. It's chock full of information on that. But parity is about 300 miles.
I literally had
That's part of the conversation.
an attorney friend of mine today who lives in Horseshoe Bend in Roswell, works in Midtown, and he did the calculations to rent a car for a month or to take Lyft for 4 days a week to come down to Midtown. It cost him $40 more a month to ride and do his email and catch up. So he said it was about $55 a day for him right now with Lyft, but the productivity he was getting, and he gets free parking, so put parking on top of it, that'd probably be a delta for somebody else that wasn't a partner at a law firm. So I think we're getting there, we're getting closer, but I think once we get to autonomy where you don't have to pay for that driver, that's when it's really going to drop down into that level where you're just riding around. You had a question up here, sir? Yeah. Be a good one to end it on. I have a saying that says technology is rarely the limiting factor. I'm about to. Technology is rarely the limiting factor. So we've got all these policy things, technology is kind of racing ahead. Is privacy something that we're going to be able to have in the future, or are we just going to be able to have to live without it, right? How do we deal with privacy in the autonomous or the sharing economy world? Who wants to start?
I'll do real quick. I think we give up privacy for value. We do that all the time on our smartphones now. You got 100 apps on your phone that knows where you are, and you do that because of value. So if there's perceived value, we will give up privacy.
I think we're pretty well already over that bridge, actually.
You think we're over the bridge? David, anything there?
Yeah, I was going to add on to that. I'll put my sort of legal hat on here since I am an attorney, actually. I mean, this is an area the privacy issue has been a huge issue in Europe. They just passed what's known as the GPDR or something like that, the General Privacy Data Regulations, depending on which language you use. In the U.S., kind of simply put, you're not really giving up anything you had to begin with. To be blunt, in the U.S., where you drive your car on a public road, people can see you. You don't have an expectation of privacy at all when you're driving in the U.S. Politicians won't say that. You have privacy in your persons, papers, houses, and effects. They can't search your house. They can't go through your bank records. They can't do that. But where you go in your car with that license plate on it is not something that's private anyway. So just like anybody by the road can see you and write your license plate number down, so nobody's really giving up anything they don't have already. It's more of a perceptions issue. Right. And there's also the factor of safety where they need to be able to identify people that are operating 2,000-pound vehicles on public roads and know who they are. It's not like you're being by yourself. You could potentially cause harm. So I don't think privacy is that much of an issue in this country. It is kind of the Wild West in the U.S., always has been. So you might as well take advantage of being able to get something back for your data because I don't want to say it doesn't belong to you, but it kind of really doesn't belong to you really anyway because you're on public.
Well, and what David's talking about there, I had one law class, David had 100. In plain sight, I think is the stipulation to, if I see something happening in plain sight, I can bust in if I'm an officer. So there's the in plain sight, but there's also the license plate that you have on your cars, you guys know you don't own, right? The state owns that license plate. So for them to take a picture of that, it's really them taking a picture of themselves. It just happens that it's attached to your car. So I do think there's a lot of leeway there. What I will argue with is the MDN, right, the mobile data number from your car, from your private contract with your private carrier, probably does have a privacy agreement. And if anybody saw ZDNet yesterday, what I've been waiting for 14 years when I started doing this at IBM about tracking cell phones, Chris, with going back to some of the AirSage days here in Atlanta, one of the innovators in the space, we finally had kind of that CNN moment where we've had a big break in privacy this week where people said, wait a minute, you're tracking my phone every place. And so now all the carriers are starting to pull back from that. So I think we have had a seminal moment this week. And I look at ZDNet and look at that thing. So we're at 8 o'clock. That was as long as they were going to go. I know some of the people will stick around. I know I'm heading over to a bar next door with a little camp to set up. We're going to have some fun over there if anyone wants to join us. But thank you, everybody, for coming out. Please make sure you're on the next one. Thank you to our panel. David, thank you, buddy.